Welcome to HOA Control Freaks. The HOA wanted control, not safety. I am standing in my driveway at 5:45 in the morning, watching a tow truck back up toward my car, and the only thing keeping me calm is the folder in my hand that is about to end this whole nightmare. The driver steps out, breath fogging in the icy air, and walks toward me with a clipboard. Behind him, Laura Thompson is speed-walking across the street in her purple belted wool coat and white earmuffs. Thin reading glasses perched on her nose for maximum dramatic effect. She is smiling like she just won the lottery. "Good morning," she says, voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I told you there would be consequences." I look at the driver. "Can I see the authorization paperwork?" He hands it over without a word. I scan it quickly. The form lists my address, my vehicle, and a violation code that references the Plomark Park Reserve Association bylaws. What it does not list is any proof that I was notified, any proof that I violated the rule in question, or any signature from someone with actual legal authority to authorize a tow. Laura steps closer, her smile widening. "You left your holiday lights up past the deadline," she says. "You created a slip hazard on your sidewalk. You refused to comply with winter safety standards. The board voted, and we are removing your vehicle until you pay the fines and correct the violations." I turn back to the driver. This authorization does not have a valid signature. It also does not list any notice period or proof of delivery. If you hook my car, you are taking on liability for an illegal tow. The driver frowns and looks at Laura. "She told me this was cleared through the management company." "It is cleared," Laura snaps. "I am the treasurer of this HOA. And I am the reason this neighborhood stays civilized. We do not tolerate people who refuse to follow winter safety rules." I open the folder and pull out the first document. It is a comparison photo set I printed last night. 12 images showing sidewalks around the neighborhood. Half of them are worse than mine. Thick ice patches and uncleared snow piling up against mailboxes. Not one of those homes has a fine or a notice. I hand the photos to the driver. "Take a look. She is running a selective enforcement racket, and you are about to be part of it." He flips through the photos slowly, his frown deepening. Laura tries to grab them out of his hands, but he steps back. "Those are irrelevant," she says, voice rising. "Those homeowners are in compliance. They follow the rules. You do not." I stayed calm, because I had one piece of proof that would end the whole game. I pull out the second document, a printed dispatch log from the tow company itself. I got it 2 days ago from a tow yard clerk who quietly admitted the HOA paperwork is sloppy. The log shows the request for this tow came in at 11:30 last night, and it lists Laura Thompson as the requester. No management company, no board vote, just Laura calling in a tow on her own authority. I hand the log to the driver. She does not have the authority to order this tow. "Check your own records." His face goes pale. He looks at Laura, then back at me. He folds up the clipboard and walks back to the truck without another word. Laura is screaming now, her voice echoing across the frozen street. "You cannot do this. The board will back me because they are afraid of me. You are going to pay every cent of those fines, and I will make sure you never feel safe in this neighborhood again." The driver climbs into the truck, pulls forward, and drives away. The hook chain drags along the pavement with a metallic scrape that cuts through the morning silence. Laura is still screaming, but I am already walking back toward my front door. I have a medical appointment in the morning, and rescheduling would take months. I do not have time for this. Let me back up. I moved to Salt Lake City 3 years ago for a firefighter position with rotating shifts. The pay is solid, the work is what I trained for, and the city has good access to the mountains. I bought a townhouse in a subdivision called Plomark Park Reserve, which sounded harmless enough. The HOA is called the Plomark Park Reserve Association, and the dues are reasonable. What I did not know until the first winter was that this HOA treats snow and ice enforcement like a contact sport. Every time it snows, the board sends out updated rules about shoveling deadlines, sidewalk salt application, snow pile placement, and driveway drainage. If you are even slightly late clearing your walk, you get a notice. If you pile snow too close to the curb, you get a fine. If your downspout drains onto the sidewalk and freezes, you get both. Laura Thompson is the treasurer, and she runs the Winter Safety Committee like a private police force with no authority. She drives around the neighborhood every morning with a tabbed binder and a phone camera, documenting every violation she can find. She emails photos to the management company with timestamps and grid coordinates. She shows up at board meetings with printed packets and speaks for 20 minutes about slip liability and insurance premiums. The board is terrified of her, so they let her do whatever she wants. I made it through the first 2 winters without trouble. I shovel my walk, I salt the steps, I move snow to the designated pile area near the mailboxes. I do not leave lights up past the deadline, I do not block the plow routes, and I do not let ice build up on my driveway. This year, everything changed. It started the day after Christmas. I had holiday lights up on the porch railing and along the roofline, basic white LED strings on timers. The HOA rule says lights must come down by January 2nd. I planned to take them down on New Year's Day, but we got a massive ice storm that coated everything in a half-inch shell. The ladder was unusable. The roof was a death trap. I sent an email to the management company explaining the delay and asking for a 1-week extension. I got a response from Laura within an hour. Extensions are not granted for weather. The rule is the rule. You have until January 2nd at midnight. I replied and said I am a firefighter, I know what a fall from a ladder looks like, and I am not risking my life to take down decorative lights. I will remove them as soon as the ice melts. She replied again, if the lights are not down by the deadline, you will receive a violation notice and a $50 fine. Repeat violations will result in further action. I ignored her. I figured she was bluffing. The ice melted on January 5th, and I took the lights down that afternoon. On January 6th, I found a violation notice taped to my front door. It listed the offense as failure to comply with seasonal decoration removal deadline, and it included a $50 fine payable within 14 days. It also included a black and white photo of my porch taken at night, the lights glowing in the frame, with a timestamp of January 3rd at 7:15 in the evening. I called the management company. They said the fine was valid and the board had voted to uphold it. I asked who voted. They said they could not disclose individual votes. I paid the fine because I am trying to keep my record clean because of background checks at work. Firefighting jobs run deep checks, and any legal trouble or unpaid debts can raise flags. I did not want an HOA collections case showing up in a future screening. 2 days later, I got another notice. This one said I had failed to properly maintain my sidewalk and had created a slip hazard. The photo showed a small patch of ice near my mailbox, maybe 6 inches across. The fine was $75. I went outside and looked at the spot. It was a natural freeze from runoff, the kind of thing that happens on every sidewalk in the neighborhood after a thaw and freeze cycle. I grabbed my phone and walked around the block. I took photos of 12 other sidewalks, all of them with worse ice coverage than mine. Some had thick ridges of compacted snow, others had puddles frozen solid across the entire width. I went back inside and emailed the management company again. I attached all 12 photos and wrote a detailed explanation of selective enforcement. I pointed out that I was being targeted while other homes with identical or worse conditions were ignored. Laura replied directly to me, copying the management company. She said the other homes were in compliance because they had applied salt and gravel as required by the winter maintenance addendum. She said I had not applied any treatment, which made my sidewalk a liability. I replied and said I had applied salt the night before the freeze. I did not have a receipt because I used salt I already owned, but I could show her the empty bag if she wanted proof. She replied and said photographic evidence was required for any compliance claim. Since I did not have photos, my claim was invalid. That was when I realized she was changing the interpretation of a rule mid-argument and acting offended when challenged. The winter maintenance addendum does not require photo proof of salt application. It just says homeowners must keep sidewalks clear and treat ice hazards promptly. Laura was inventing a new standard on the spot, and the board was backing her because they were afraid to push back. I paid the second fine. I started taking photos of my sidewalk every morning before I left for shift. I bought a cheap doorbell camera and pointed it at the front walk so I would have timestamp video of every salt application and every shoveling session. Then the snow piles started. We got another storm in mid-January, 8 inches overnight. I shoveled my driveway and walk at 6 in the morning before my shift, piling the snow near the curb in the designated area. When I got home that night, there was a notice on my door. It said I had placed snow in a restricted zone and created a drainage obstruction. The fine was $100. I looked at the snow pile. It was exactly where the HOA diagram shows it should be, 5 feet from the mailbox and 2 feet from the curb. I pulled up the diagram on my phone and compared it to the actual placement. Perfect match. I called the management company again. They said the restricted zone rule had been updated in December to account for plow damage concerns. Snow piles now had to be at least 8 feet from the curb. I asked why I was not notified of the update. They said the update was posted on the HOA website and emailed to all residents. I checked my email. No update. I checked the website. The update was buried in a board meeting summary PDF, one sentence in the middle of a 6-page document. I did not pay that fine. I wrote a formal dispute and sent it to the board with copies of the original diagram, photos of my snow pile, and a request for a hearing. Laura showed up at my door 2 days later with a bucket of gravel. She said the board had reviewed my dispute and rejected it. She said I needed to apply gravel to the snow pile area to prevent ice buildup, and she was providing the gravel as a courtesy. I told her I did not want her gravel. She set the bucket down on my porch anyway and walked away. The next morning, I found another notice. This one said I was damaging HOA property by allowing gravel runoff onto the common sidewalk. The fine was $150. I looked at the bucket. It was still sitting on my porch, untouched. I took a photo of it, then carried it back to Laura's house and left it on her driveway. She filed a harassment complaint with the management company. They sent me a warning letter saying any further contact with board members outside of official channels would result in escalated enforcement action. That was when I started building my case. I went back through every notice, every fine, every email. I pulled property records and compared them to the violation log the management company sent out in the monthly newsletter. The pattern was obvious. Laura was targeting specific homes, mostly newer residents and people who worked irregular hours. She ignored longtime residents and anyone who attended board meetings regularly. I also noticed something else. Every violation photo she submitted had the same angle and the same lighting. She was taking them during her morning walk, always between 6 and 7, always from the sidewalk. That meant she was trespassing on driveways and porches to get close-up shots. I asked a neighbor, a guy named Marcus who works night shifts at the hospital, if he had been getting notices. He said yes, 3 in the past month, all of them for minor snow and ice issues. He said he tried to dispute them, but the board rejected every appeal. I asked if he had photos of other sidewalks with worse conditions. He said yes. Dozens. We started comparing notes. Between the two of us, we had over 40 photos showing selective enforcement. We also had a timeline showing that Laura had filed violation reports within hours of every snowstorm, which meant she was patrolling the neighborhood constantly. Marcus became my ally. He agreed to show up as a witness if I needed one at a hearing. He also gave me contact information for 2 other neighbors who had been fined unfairly. Then Laura escalated. On January 28th, she sent an email blast to the entire neighborhood. The subject line was Winter Safety Update and Community Responsibility. The email was 3 paragraphs of passive-aggressive language about one resident who refuses winter safety compliance and creates risk for everyone. She did not name me, but she included my street and house number in the violation summary table at the bottom. The email made it sound like I was leaving ice sheets on my sidewalk and blocking emergency access. None of it was true, but it did not matter. I started getting dirty looks from neighbors. Someone left a note on my car that said, "Shovel your walk or move out." If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare stories. Laura followed up the email with a second escalation. She contacted the management company and requested a coordinated harassment push using the management company and the tow vendor together. She said I was a repeat offender who posed a liability risk and needed immediate compliance action. The management company sent me a letter saying my account was under review and any further violations would result in vehicle towing and a lien filing. I called the management company and asked what violations I had that justified a tow threat. They said I had 3 unpaid fines totaling $325. I said I had disputed all 3 and never received a hearing. They said disputes are not automatic stays of payment, and I was required to pay first and dispute later. I asked to see the policy. They sent me a PDF of the bylaws. The section on fines said residents may request a hearing within 30 days of a violation notice, and the board will schedule a hearing within 60 days. It did not say anything about paying first. I pointed this out. They said the board had the authority to interpret the bylaws and enforce payment deadlines as needed. That was when I realized the HOA was not interested in fairness. They were interested in control. Laura had turned winter enforcement into a weapon, and the board was letting her do it because they did not want to be her next target. I decided I needed a lawyer. I called a friend who had dealt with an HOA dispute a few years ago, and he gave me the name of an attorney who specializes in homeowner association cases. I scheduled a consultation for February 3rd, but Laura was not done. On February 1st, I woke up to find orange traffic cones blocking my driveway exit. There were 4 of them, arranged in a line across the bottom of my driveway where it met the street. Each cone had a small sticker on it with the Plomark Park Reserve Association logo, but no readable text. I moved the cones and drove to work. When I got home that night, the cones were back and there was a notice on my door. It said I had removed HOA safety equipment without authorization and created a hazard by driving over a marked closure zone. The fine was $200. I called the management company. They said Laura had filed a report claiming my driveway was draining onto the street and creating black ice. She had requested a temporary closure while the board reviewed the drainage issue. I asked who authorized the closure. They said the Winter Safety Committee had the authority to implement temporary measures in response to hazard reports. I asked when I would get a hearing. They said the board would review the issue at the next meeting, which was scheduled for February 15th. That was 2 weeks away. I could not wait 2 weeks with my driveway blocked. I moved the cones again. I took photos of my driveway, showing no ice, no drainage, no hazard. I also took photos of 3 other driveways on my street, all of them with visible runoff and ice patches. None of them had cones. The next morning, the cones were back. This time there were 6, and they extended partway up my driveway. I moved them again. I stacked them on the curb and left. That night, Laura knocked on my door. She was holding her tabbed binder and wearing her thin reading glasses for dramatic effect. "You are in violation of a direct safety order," she said. "The board has authorized me to take enforcement action, and if you remove those cones again, we will proceed with towing and a lien." I asked to see the authorization. She opened the binder and showed me a printed email. It was from the management company addressed to her, confirming that the Winter Safety Committee could implement temporary closures as needed. It did not mention my address specifically, and it did not include any board vote or approval. "This does not authorize you to block my driveway," I said. "You need a board vote and written notice." She smiled. "The board will back me because they are afraid of me." "You can fight this if you want, but you will lose. I am the reason this neighborhood stays civilized." She turned and walked away. I watched her cross the street, get into her car, and drive off. I decided I was done being polite. I called the non-emergency police line and reported the cones as an obstruction. The dispatcher said it sounded like a civil matter and I should contact my HOA or a lawyer. I called my lawyer and moved the consultation up to the next day. He reviewed the notices, the emails, the photos, and the bylaws. He said I had a strong case for selective enforcement and harassment. He also said the driveway blockade was likely illegal, and I should document everything. He told me to keep moving the cones and to file a formal complaint with the board. He said if the HOA tried to tow my car or file a lien, he would represent me in court and go after them for damages. I felt better knowing I had legal backup, but I also knew Laura was not going to stop. The cones kept appearing. I kept moving them. Laura kept filing reports. The management company kept sending me warning letters. Then the tow truck showed up. It was February 7th, 5:30 in the morning. I was getting ready for a shift when I heard the backup beeper. I looked out the window and saw the truck in the street, angling toward my driveway. I grabbed my folder, the one with all the photos and the dispatch log, and ran outside. That brings me back to the driveway. The driver, the folder, and Laura screaming as the truck drove away. After the tow truck left, I went inside and called my lawyer. I told him what happened. He said to document everything and to file a police report if Laura tried to block my driveway again. I also called Marcus. He said he had video footage from his doorbell camera showing Laura placing the cones at 4 in the morning. He offered to send me the file. I thanked him and said I would add it to the evidence pile. That afternoon, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had reviewed the tow incident and determined that I had interfered with authorized enforcement action. They were adding a $500 fine for obstruction and requiring me to attend a mandatory compliance hearing on February 15th. I forwarded the email to my lawyer. He replied and said we would attend the hearing together and present the full evidence package. He also said he was drafting a demand letter for the board, outlining the selective enforcement pattern and the illegal tow authorization. The hearing was 8 days away. I had 8 days to finalize my case and prepare for whatever Laura was going to throw at me next. I spent those days gathering more evidence. I walked the neighborhood every morning, taking photos of sidewalks and driveways. I found 10 more homes with worse conditions than mine, none of them with fines or notices. I also found 2 homes with holiday lights still up, weeks past the deadline. No fines. I printed everything and organized it in a 3-ring binder with tabs. I labeled each section: selective enforcement, illegal tow authorization, driveway blockade, harassment campaign. I made copies for my lawyer, for the board, and for myself. I also filed a formal complaint with the Utah Division of Real Estate, which oversees HOA management companies. I outlined the selective enforcement, the illegal tow attempt, and the harassment. I attached copies of all the notices, emails, and photos. On February 10th, I got another surprise. I came home from a shift and found my front steps covered in rock salt, way more than I would ever use. It was piled in thick drifts, spilling onto the walkway and the porch. There was a notice on my door. It said the HOA had applied emergency salt treatment to my property as part of a neighborhood safety initiative, and I would be charged $75 for the service. I recognized this immediately as the side complication Laura had been planning. The HOA tries to salt my steps without permission so they can claim I did it wrong. If I complained, she would say I was refusing safety measures. If I left it alone, she would find something wrong with the application and fine me anyway. I took photos and called my lawyer. He said it was trespassing and property damage, and I should file a police report. I called the police. An officer came out and took a report. He said it looked like a civil dispute, but he would document it. He took photos and gave me a case number. I also sent an email to the management company and the board. I said the HOA did not have permission to enter my property or apply any treatment. I demanded that they remove the salt immediately and reimburse me for any damage to my steps or walkway. I got a reply from Laura within an hour. She said the Winter Safety Committee had the authority to implement emergency measures on any property that posed a risk to the community. She said my steps were icy, and the committee had acted in the interest of public safety. She said I was required to pay for the service. I replied and said my steps were not icy, I had applied salt the night before, and the committee did not have the authority to trespass on my property. I also said I would be pursuing legal action if the salt was not removed and the charge was not dropped. She did not reply. The next morning, the salt was still there. I swept it off myself and bagged it. I took more photos showing the cleared steps and the bags of excess salt. 2 days before the hearing, Laura escalated again. I was at the grocery store when I got a call from Marcus. He said there was a contractor at my house trying to put a wheel clamp on my car. I asked what kind of contractor. He said a guy in an unmarked van with a boot and a toolbox. I told him to stay on the line and ran to my car. I drove home in under 10 minutes. When I got there, Marcus was standing in my driveway with his phone out, recording. Laura was standing next to the contractor, pointing at my car and holding her tab binder. The contractor was holding a yellow metal boot, the kind you see on parking enforcement vehicles. I parked on the street and walked up. What is going on? Laura smiled. The board has authorized a mobilization of your vehicle pending resolution of unpaid fines. This contractor will install a compliance boot until you pay the balance and attend the hearing. I looked at the contractor. Who hired you? He pointed at Laura. She called this morning. Said it was an HOA enforcement action. I pulled out my phone and opened the bylaws PDF. I scrolled to the enforcement section and found the relevant paragraph. I read it out loud. The association may pursue legal remedies for unpaid fines, including liens and collection actions. Vehicle immobilization is not authorized under any circumstances. Laura's smile faded. That is an outdated version. The board amended the bylaws last year. Show me the amendment. She flipped through her binder. I do not have it with me, but it is on file with the management company. I turned to the contractor. If you put that boot on my car, you are committing an illegal immobilization. I will call the police, and you will be liable for damages. He looked at Laura. She said this was legal. It is not, I said. Check with your supervisor before you do anything. He pulled out his phone and stepped away. I could hear him talking in a low voice. After a minute, he came back and shook his head. My boss says we need written authorization from the HOA board and proof of bylaw amendments. She does not have either. He packed up the boot and left. Laura stood there, her face red, her binder clutched to her chest. You are going to regret this, she said. The board will back me because they are afraid of me. I watched her walk away. Marcus stayed until she was gone, then gave me a thumbs up. That was close, he said. I thanked him for calling. He said he would testify at the hearing if I needed him. The night before the hearing, I could not sleep. I kept going over the evidence, rehearsing what I would say, imagining every possible objection Laura might raise. I had my lawyer on standby, my binder organized, and my photos printed in color. I also had my trump card, the one piece of evidence I had not shared with anyone yet. The hearing was scheduled for 7 in the evening at the community center. I arrived at 6:45. My lawyer met me in the parking lot. We walked in together. The board was already seated at a long table. The president, the vice president, Laura, and 2 other members I did not recognize. There were about a dozen residents in the audience, including Marcus. Laura was at the far end of the table, her binder open, her reading glasses on. She looked calm and confident. The president called the meeting to order and read the agenda. The first item was my compliance hearing. He said I was being charged with multiple violations of winter safety rules, refusal to pay fines, obstruction of enforcement actions, and harassment of board members. He said the board would hear my statement, review the evidence, and make a determination. My lawyer stood up and introduced himself. He said I was disputing all charges and had evidence of selective enforcement and illegal actions by the HOA. He asked permission to present. The president nodded. Go ahead. I opened my binder. I started with the comparison photos, showing 12 sidewalks with worse conditions than mine and 0 fines. I showed the timeline of violations, highlighting the pattern of targeting newer residents and shift workers. I showed the emails where Laura changed the interpretation of rules mid-argument. Then I showed the dispatch log proving Laura had ordered the tow without authorization. I showed the video of her placing the cones at 4 in the morning. I showed the photos of the excessive salt dumped on my steps without permission. The room was silent. The board members were looking at each other. Laura was staring at me, her jaw tight. My lawyer spoke. The evidence shows a clear pattern of harassment and selective enforcement. My client has been targeted because he disputed the initial fines. The HOA has violated its own bylaws, committed trespass, and attempted an illegal vehicle immobilization. We are requesting that all fines be dropped, all enforcement actions be reversed, and the board take disciplinary action against the individuals responsible. The president cleared his throat. We will need to review this evidence and consult with our attorney before making a determination. Laura stood up. This is absurd. He is twisting the facts. He removed safety equipment. He refused to comply with emergency measures. He interfered with authorized enforcement. The board needs to stand firm. My lawyer looked at me. I nodded. It was time. I pulled out the final document from my binder. It was a printed copy of an email I had received 3 days earlier from the tow company owner. He had reviewed the dispatch log, the authorization forms, and the contract with the HOA. He had concluded that Laura had acted outside her authority and had exposed his company to liability. He had decided to cancel the HOA contract, refund any charges related to my case, and void the tow authorization. The email also included a statement that the tow company would not accept any further requests from the Plomark Park Reserve Association until the board could provide proof of proper authorization procedures. I handed the email to the president. He read it slowly, his face going pale. He passed it to the vice president, who read it and passed it to Laura. Laura's face went white. She looked at me, then at the email, then back at me. "Where did you get this?" she asked. I spoke directly to her. I contacted the tow company after you tried to have my car towed illegally. I provided them with the dispatch log showing you had no authority. They realized you had been using their services without proper board oversight. They decided to cut ties. The president looked at Laura. "Is this true?" She did not answer. She just sat down and closed her binder. My lawyer continued. The tow company has provided documentation showing that multiple tow requests over the past 6 months were initiated by Mrs. Thompson without board approval. The company is now reviewing all past authorizations and may pursue legal action against the HOA for misrepresentation. The vice president leaned forward. "Laura, did you authorize tows without bringing them to the board?" Laura finally spoke. "I acted in the interest of the community. The board gave me authority to handle winter enforcement. I did what was necessary." The president shook his head. "You were supposed to bring enforcement recommendations to the board for a vote. You were not authorized to act unilaterally." The meeting went silent again. The president looked at the other board members. They whispered among themselves for a minute. Then the president spoke. "We are going to table this hearing pending a full audit of enforcement actions over the past year. All current fines against you are suspended until the audit is complete. We will also be consulting with our attorney about potential bylaw violations and liability issues." My lawyer stood. "We will expect a written resolution within 30 days. If the audit confirms selective enforcement and unauthorized actions, we will be pursuing a settlement that includes refunds and limits on enforcement authority." The president nodded. "Understood." The hearing ended. I walked out with my lawyer and Marcus. Laura stayed in her seat, staring at the closed binder in front of her. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from the HOA attorney. It was a formal settlement offer. The board had completed the audit and found multiple procedural violations. Laura had authorized 17 tow requests without board approval. She had issued over 50 violation notices using standards not approved by the board. She had implemented temporary closures and emergency measures without proper authorization. The settlement included a full refund of all fines I had paid, a written apology, and a policy revision limiting the Winter Safety Committee's authority. The board also agreed to implement a formal review process for all enforcement actions, requiring board approval for any fines over $50. The letter also stated that Laura Thompson had resigned from the board effective immediately. I signed the settlement. I got a check for $325 2 weeks later. The HOA also sent a neighborhood-wide email explaining the policy changes and apologizing for the enforcement issues. They did not name Laura, but everyone knew. The tow company followed through on their decision. They canceled the HOA contract and sent a letter to all residents explaining that they would no longer respond to requests from the association without verified board authorization. Marcus and I kept in touch. He said several other residents who had been fined unfairly filed disputes after seeing my settlement. The board ended up refunding over $2,000 in total. Laura moved out of the neighborhood in April. I heard she bought a condo in a different part of the city, somewhere without an HOA. As for the funny karma moment, it happened during the final board meeting in March when the audit results were presented. The board president was reading through the findings, and when he got to the section about unauthorized tow requests, a gust of wind from the open window blew Laura's printed packet across the room. Pages scattered everywhere, landing on board members, fluttering into the audience, some sliding under chairs. Laura had to crawl around on the floor picking them up while the president continued reading. It was petty, but it felt like the universe delivering one last jab. In the end, the HOA dropped the case to avoid a public records mess. The Utah Division of Real Estate opened an investigation into the management company after my complaint, and the company ended up implementing new training requirements for all staff handling enforcement actions. Karen, or rather Laura, got corrected by the HOA attorney in plain language during a closed-door session I was not present for. But I heard about it from the vice president later. He said the attorney told her that her actions had exposed the HOA to significant liability and that her resignation was the only way to avoid further legal trouble. I still live in Plomark Park Reserve. The new winter safety rules are reasonable, and the board is a lot more careful about enforcement. I still take photos of my sidewalk every morning just in case, but I have not gotten a single notice since the settlement. And I still have that folder, the one with all the photos and the dispatch log and the tow company email. I keep it on a shelf in my office, a reminder that documentation beats intimidation every time. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.